Welcome to this special presentation of Investing in Psychedelics, brought to you by the Canadian Securities Exchange in partnership with CFN Media. Hi, my name's Sher, and I'm Director of Listings Development with the Canadian Securities Exchange. And today we are here as part of our Investing in Psychedelics series, and I am joined today by Sher Ali Butt, who is the CEO and co-founder of CB Therapeutics. Thank you so much for joining us, Sher.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
We're excited to have you as part of this. We wanted to find out about CB Therapeutics. We want to get the CEO clip, the elevator pitch. So why don't you just dive right into it and tell us what the company's about?
Sure. So we are the first private company in the world to make psilocybin, DMT, and a range of other molecules reverse engineered into yeast. We started the company back in 2016 by myself and my college friend, Dr. Jacob Wogan. And in 2016, we were initially working on cannabinoids. So we are one of the first companies in the world to scale up cannabinoid biosynthesis up to a 400-liter bioreactor. And about a year and a half, 2 years ago, we got interested in psychedelics, obviously, because of our own history with understanding psychedelics and using them for our own self. So again, we jumped on the bandwagon and became the first company to not only make psilocybin and 7 other molecules in mushrooms, but also go on to make DMT variants like 5-MeO-DMT, bufotenin, etc.
Wow. Okay. So I'm going to have to jump in right there and ask you, why yeast? Tell me about this process.
Yeah, so typically, so there's currently 2 ways to make psilocybin, and we'll just take that as a case example here. Typically, if you are growing psilocybin, the mushrooms, and you're extracting psilocybin from them, typically mushrooms have about 0.5 to 0.6% psilocybin in them, which is less than 1%. So you're looking at roughly about $100,000 a kilogram, which is the final cost of pure psilocybin from extraction. If you're doing chemical synthesis psilocybin, which they're doing for some of the clinical trials that you're seeing up there, they cost anywhere between $300,000 to $500,000 per kilogram. The reason why we're doing yeast is because our process, the cost is about $2,500 to $3,000 a kilogram. So by any measure, we're cutting the cost by 20 to 50x.
Wow, that's crazy. And I mean, yeast is something that's so stable and easy to obviously access. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, typically when you look at other biotech platforms, there's algae, there's bacteria, yeast. The reason why we went with yeast is the most studied organism on the planet, which means that we can make a lot of modifications to it that you can't do with other organisms. And secondly, yeast is the most scalable. So with bacteria or algae, there's only a certain scale that you can achieve. With yeast, you can have a much higher scale, which will allow you in the future to be able to make it even more cheaper, whatever molecule that you're working on. And that's why we decided to work with yeast instead of bacteria or algae or other platforms.
And so once you do this, once you go through that process, then what's the final product and what is it used for?
So the final part, just to give you an example, what we do is we have the yeast strain, which we've engineered through bioengineering or genetic engineering. Once the strain is ready, it takes us about 4 to 5 days of fermentation, where basically there's a big bioreactor. It's very similar to making beer. The only difference here is instead of making beer, the yeast make the molecules that we want them to make. So for example, CBD or psilocybin, etc. So typically there's about 4 to 5 days of fermentation. After the fermentation is done, you stop the fermentation, and then you do a simple extraction to get the molecules out. And that's so you can look at it as a 1-week process. So if you look at, for example, growing mushrooms or other plants or organisms, there's nothing out there that can do this in 1 week. So that's another huge advantage, is the turnaround time that you can get of this molecule. Secondly, because we use yeast, not only can we make the actual natural molecules like psilocybin, psilocin, etc., we can also make variants by tweaking the enzyme. So we can readily make libraries of these molecules. So for example, for psilocybin, we can make 50 variants that each have slightly different properties from the original molecule. And these variants are patentable. So something to go along the pharma route as well.
That's so interesting. Now, is yeast stable enough in this process, or is it similar to agriculture where you're growing it and you might end up with a bit of a different product every time? Sorry for my ignorance, but does it create kind of that consistent product for you?
100%, and that's it will make the exact same product every single time. And so, and I think you bring up a very good point. I think when you look at, for example, cannabis or mushrooms or other agricultural products, I think one of the problems that you see is there's a lot of variation from the same batch or even the same strain. So, for example, if you have two different grows of mushrooms, you may have one that has 0.2% psilocybin, another one that has 0.7%. So now you have to sort of standardize those if you're making a big batch of medicine or whatever you need to make. The whole another big advantage of using yeast or biotech is you have the exact same consistent process. Means it's exactly the same thing in exactly the same amount of dose, and it's not different from each batch. It's exactly the same thing.
Well, I was speaking with kind of one of the thought leaders that are part of this series, and he was saying, you know, the big disruptors in the space are going to be the ones that are able to take this from, you know, a biological product and be able to stabilize it to the point that we're able to use it,
Yep.
you know, for those pharmacological, you know, uses, and
Yep.
being able to navigate it from kind of a measured level, right, so that it can
Absolutely.
be used from that. So it sounds like you guys are definitely on to something. Why don't you finish off by telling us a little bit about your team and a little bit about the company itself from kind of an investment standpoint?
Sure. So we started the company in 2016 by myself and my friend Dr. Jacob Bogan. I have my background is I've worked for a big cannabis lab called Steep Hill. I was the lab director there. I also worked for Novartis Pharmaceuticals. I brought two drugs to the market with the FDA, so I kind of understand the space a little bit. I also have an MBA from UCSD, and I started another company that I sold called CB Labs. Jacob is a PhD in bioengineering from Berkeley, and we started the company in 2016. In 2017, we were able to confirm that we were able to make cannabinoids like CBD, THC, etc. in the yeast. We filed a bunch of patents. In 2018, we got into Y Combinator. We raised a big round, about $4.5 million after Y Combinator. And right around that time, we got interested in psychedelics, and that led us to be the first company in the world to make DMT, psilocybin, and many of these molecules into yeast. Again, being the first brought us a lot of interest from research institutions. So about a month and a half ago, we signed a partnership agreement with Cleveland Clinic, where we will be making different types of tryptamines for them that they will be using for clinical trials. And in terms of where we are right now, we've had 2 rounds into the company. We're currently doing another private round at the moment, which we expect to close in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And yeah, that's pretty much where we are.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, listen, I'm so excited to have you be a part of this. I'm excited to dive into some further topics on the 17th when we'll be live.
Perfect.
And participants that will join us live will have the opportunity to do some Q&A. So if you have questions out there, get them ready.
Perfect.
But again, Sher, thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to chatting with you further on the 17th.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. Thank you, Anna.